Hi everybody, this video will describe how to create a third-person character movement in Unity in a 3D game. We'll go ahead and hit play and show you what the final setup is going to be. So I have a camera movement in here that I can move around and look around my scene. I can hit WASD and it moves the character around. The character's geometry will follow around the angles depending on if I'm hitting WASD. I can go up some ramps if that ramp is not too high. So this one is, the degrees is too high, so I can't go up that one. And I also have a setup where I can do a simple jump. So if I hit spacebar, you can jump. You can go upstairs if that stair height is not too high, so I can go up some, I can't go up others. And I can really have full kind of 3D motion that you would expect from a third-person point of view game. So let's go create this from scratch. I have a couple objects I'm going to go ahead and delete, and then we'll recreate them all from scratch. So I'm going to go ahead and remove all of these out. And I'm going to take my character geometry and remove that out of that group. Remove that. So I have a character piece of geometry here. It's a sphere, and then it has a couple of smaller spheres for the eyes, just to show a direction of where the character is going to be facing. So that is my base geometry. You can create that. I've parented the small eye geometry underneath my main player geo object, which is just a sphere. One thing I did want to mention is that I have removed out the collisions for it. So all of these objects, I've individually taken the meshes and removed the collisions component from the inspector. So none of these geometry pieces have collisions with them. Okay, the first thing I'm going to create is a empty game object. So I'm going to go up to the top, empty game object, and we'll call this one third person character. Okay. And with this third-person character, I'm going to temporarily parent this underneath the player geometry. So I'm going to drag this underneath player geometry. So it's a child of the parent geometry right now. And I'm going to go to transform in the inspector and choose reset. That moves the pivot point for that empty game object to the center of the character. Then now I'm going to take that third-person character object and drag it out. So it's no longer a child of the geometry. And then I'm going to parent the geometry underneath this new game object. Okay. So that just sets the center of the third-person character to the center of the object, and then make sure that the geometry is underneath that empty game object. So basically, if I move the empty game object, it moves that object, or the geometry. So with the third-person character, I'm going to go over here to the inspector and add a character controller. Okay, so there you can see the green wireframe. That is the collider. I don't have to create separate collisions. The character controller creates a collider for me. I'm going to make a couple adjustments, and we'll come back and make some more adjustments later. The radius is pretty good. That's the width of the collider, so I'm actually going to leave that at 0.5. But my height is too tall, so I'm going to reduce that down to 1, which is roughly the size of the ball. And then to correct any kind of vertical kind of popping that may happen, I'm going to add a center Y value of 0.03. So it actually moves the collider up a little higher, so it doesn't touch the actual ground surface. So that's a knowing that what's going to happen when I create the script, a little subtle change, changing the Y center axis value to 0.03. Alright, so then I'm going to come down here. I have a scripts folder, and I'm going to right click and I'm going to choose create new C# script, and we'll say movement third person. Let it create that. Alright, and then with that new script, I'm going to drag that as a component to the third person character empty game object. Alright, now we can create the interactions that we want to allow the character to move and then have a camera follow. Let's start with the movement. So I'm going to open up my movement third person script, and I'm using Visual Studio Code for this. Okay, so in my script, I don't need my void start. I'm not going to be using that. I am going to use update. So I need a couple of public variables. So let's do a public character controller, and we'll just locally call this one controller. And then I need to determine how fast the character can move. So we're going to do a public float speed. So the top one is getting a reference to that character controller and being able to access that within our script. Okay, so in void update, here's how we set up the motion. So I need a couple of local variables. So we'll do a float move LR. So move left to right. So if an A or D key is pressed, then we're going to store that in this variable. So float move LR equals input.getAxis raw, which is the input of WASD or the arrow keys or a gamepad. And we're going to do open parentheses, open quotation, horizontal, which is going to be A or D. So if the A or D or left right arrow is pressed, get that input stored into the variable move LR. We need one for float move front back. So we're going to store a local variable for the opposite axis, input.getAxis raw. And this one's going to be vertical. Okay, so same as I set up, but this is going to be WS, or the up and down arrow. All right, then underneath that, we need to determine what that value is when that key press is activated, and store that into a vector3 variable. So we're going to do vector3. We're going to call this one direction equals new vector3. Open up parentheses, and it's really going to be 0, 0, 0. X, Y, and Z, but we're going to use our variables that we just created here. So X is the first one, so that's our move left, right. And then 0, we're going to add an F to that, so make sure it's a float value. And this is the Y axis, so we're not going to be creating any inputs there. Move LR is the X axis, and then move front back is the Z axis. I'm going to close that parentheses. And then we're actually going to go ahead and create a correction that is going to be needed later called normalize. Normalize, what that's going to do is it's not going to multiply if more than one key is pressed at the same time. So if I hit W to move forward and I hit D to move to the right, it's not going to multiply that together. It's going to just have that consistent speed no matter how many keys are pressed, if it's more than one. So I'm going to return down. And then here's our statement to add that to the controller's move function. So if I do, it's going to be an if statement. If my direction, which is my saved vector3 of X, Y, and Z movement change, direction.magnitude is greater than 0.1 F. So if there is motion, not comma, but point, there is motion greater than 0, like 0.1, something very small, then we're going to add movement to that controller, that character controller. So we're going to do controller, which is our character controller, dot move, parentheses, and we're going to get back our direction value, times, and then we're going to go up and get our speed value, times speed times time dot delta time. Which will mean on a per frame basis, it's going to check and update the movement according to the direction and the speed. I can actually go ahead into my speed variable up here, although this is going to be public and I can change this in Unity. Let's do 6F. So that'll be a speed of 6. I'll automatically input, and I can go ahead and change that as I need to. So there's our script here, and I can zoom in here so maybe you can see a little easier. Let's say Control S to save. Let's go back into Unity. See if we have any errors. Empty statement. Let's see what that is. Oh, so we don't need a semicolon here. No semicolon there. And then now let's save. If statements don't have semicolons at the end of that line. There you go. All right, so now we already have our speed. We need a reference to our controller. So with the third person character object selected, we're just going to drag the character controller into the controller node. Those are the ways we could have set this up, but this is pretty straightforward. And let's save in Unity and go play. So now I should have motion. I should have left, right, forward, backward motion with WASD. The eyes of the character don't follow along and the camera doesn't follow along. So those are the next things we're going to set up. Okay, so let's add a camera to this. Now I'm using, or going to be using, the Cinemachine cameras. You could also do something similar with the main camera, but this method will use the Cinemachine camera tool. So if you don't have that, you can go to Window, Package Manager, and make sure up at the top it says Packages, Unity Registry, and then search for Cinemachine, and then install Cinemachine. Takes a minute or two, but then that gives us much more refined camera controls. So I'm going to create a free look camera. It's the second one down. And our main camera will then be attached and follow exactly what this free look camera does. Here's my preview in my game mode of what my camera sees. Before I do anything else, I'm going to go ahead and add in my third person character into my follow and look at for the Cinemachine camera. So a lot of refined camera settings here. In my free look camera, let's go ahead and name this. So let's say third person camera. Okay. And then my third person character node, I'm going to drag that into the follow of my free look camera, and then I'm going to drag that node again into the look at. So that's going to focus the camera around the character and also look at the character. So a couple things we're going to change. I'm going to go down here to the orbit section of my camera, and I'm going to change the bonding mode to world space. And then I'm going to play with the top, middle, and bottom rig. Visualizing that are these red circles. So if I go play now, you can see my camera's really close to my character. I can move around. My character's really close. The camera's really close. So I'm just going to move it out some. And I'm going to do that by changing some of these values. So the top rig, I'm also going to change the height as well. The top rig, I'm going to change that height to 3. And the radius to 8. The middle rig, I'm going to change that to 1.5 for the height and 10 for the radius. So you can see it zooms out further. And for the bottom rig, I'm going to change it to, let's see, negative 0.3. It's much lower. And then the radius to 8. Okay, that might be a little still too far away now. So let's reduce this back. So top radius is 5, middle radius is 8, and bottom radius is 5 again. There we go. So I'm also going to come back up to the top and uncheck invert for x-axis. I'll come back and make a couple of adjustments here. But I'm going to uncheck invert for x-axis. So that way, when I move the mouse to the left, it'll look towards the left. Now that's just a choice. So I think that's much better. I can look around, see my different angles. If I look around left or right or up or down, it kind of rotates the camera around. I'm going to make a couple of adjustments to the camera, and that's going to be in the axis control, y-axis and x-axis. So the y-axis speed, I'm going to change that to 4, and I'm going to change the acceleration time to 0.1, make it a little faster. And then the x-axis speed, I'm going to change that to 450, so that's going to be much faster there. All right, so what that'll give me now is the ability to have a camera that focuses on the character, that I can move around. But there's one issue, is that a couple issues going on, is that the character's still not facing the direction when I press A or D or S to go backwards. And if I'm looking in a different direction and I press W, the character still moves forward. So I want to make those two adjustments now. All right, so the first one's going to be the directional change for the character. So when the character turns or goes sideways, it's going to look in that direction. So let's go ahead and save our Unity scene. We're going to go back into our script. Okay, so in our script, we're going to return down in our if statement that we created. And we're going to add some math equations to allow the character to turn when I'm using WASD to follow that direction. So we need a local variable called float. And this is going to be a target angle, is going to be the name of it. The angle of the character should follow the input axis. So we're going to use a lot of math equations. I'm not going to go into all of the specifics of how all these math equations work, but we're going to use a math function, mathf.atan2. What this is going to do is look at overall the directional change between two different axes. And what the two axes we need to look at are the two horizontal axes. So direction.x and direction.z. Okay. So So it's going to look at the difference in change between directional x and directional z. That's going to give us a radian value. So we're going to do close out parentheses, and outside of that, times math f again, which is another math function, and one called rad to degree, rad to deg. So this one converts a radian into a degree, so that way we can then apply it to the, we do a semicolon, to the direction that we want the character to face. So we need this first variable to set that up. The next line, return down, we're going to do transform.rotation equals, and this is going to be the one that is going to change the direction of the character compared to if we're hitting WASD. So we're going to use another couple of math terms, quaternion and Euler. Quaternion is the rotational angle, and Euler is the rotational angle compared to other axes. So we have three axes of rotation, x, y, and z. Quaternion dot Euler. We're going to open up parentheses, and we're going to do 0f, comma, target angle, comma, 0f. Instead of a 0 or an O, we need a 0. So what it's going to do is it's going to take the angle of the target angle above that and put it into the y-axis of this object's rotation. So it's basically going to rotate from the top of the character horizontally to face the right angle. Let's hit Control S to save. Let's go back into Unity and go play test. So if I play now, if I hit W, it goes forward. If I hit A, it goes to the left. S, down. And then D. It's snapping kind of back and forth, so if you like that kind of snapping option, you can change that if you want to as well. We can actually smooth this over with a couple other variables. So that works, but it's a little bit of a snapping kind of function. So back in our script, we're going to return down where our variables are at the top and do a new public float. And we're going to call this one turn smooth time. And do equal, and we'll do a very low value, 0.1f. And then we're going to create a private variable called private float turn smooth velocity. And we'll do a semicolon. So we're going to determine what that is in our script here. All right, so below our float target angle that we created, we're going to create a new float called just angle. And this is going to be allowing it to kind of smooth over that motion. We're going to use mathf again for a math function, and we're going to use a function called smooth damp angle, which it does exactly what it says. It's going to smooth the angle that we're pulling it in, which is going to smooth the overall motion transition between two directions. Mathf dot smooth damp angle, and then here's where we're going to reference those different sections in those variables that we just created. So the first one we need to figure out is what the transform dot Euler angles dot y, which is that vertical axis. So what is the initial vertical axis? And then we're going to do comma, and then we're going to type in target angle. So it's going to then run this line above that. And then we're going to do comma, ref turn smooth velocity. Okay. Comma, turn smooth time. Okay, so those are the integration of those variables above that. All right, so then in our transform, we're going to change this from target angle to just angle. Because target angle is going to go into the next line of this float angle. I need a semicolon at the end of that line. And in our transform rotation, we're going to smooth over that motion. So we just replace that target angle with angle in that last statement there. So let's hit Control S to save. Go back into Unity and play, and the motion as it's transitioning should now be smoother between the different angles. There we go, so it's a lot smoother of a motion. Alright, so now what we want to do is have the camera motion direct which way the character can move forward. Okay, right now it's not set up that way. So let's go back into our script, and up at the top, we're going to add another public float. And I'm actually going to put this above my, or not public float, another public variable. I'm going to put this underneath the character controller one. So public transform, and we're just going to call this one cam. This is going to be a camera reference. All right, and in our float target angle, we're going to add to this. So after the multiplication to change it to a degree, we're then going to do plus cam dot Euler angles dot y, which is going to look at the camera's y directional change, y directional rotate, and then apply that to the rest of it. So we need a couple other things in here to get this to work. And we're going to add a new vector. So we're turned down one more time underneath those three lines, but above the controller move. So we'll do vector 3, and we're going to call this one move direction equals, and we're going to use that quaternion dot Euler. And we're going to do 0f comma target angle dot 0f. Close that parentheses. So that's going to incorporate the camera motion. And then outside of that parentheses, we're going to do times vector 3 dot forward. So this will direct the motion of the character towards the camera's forward direction. Okay. Now we just need to make one small adjustment to the controller move line. And instead of direction, we're going to change that to move direction, the previous variable we just created. All right, so let's save. Go back into Unity, see if we got any errors. All right, we're good. In our character, now we need a reference to our camera. Now here's the key part here, is we're not going to use that third-person camera. We need to use our main camera. So in our script for the third-person character, we're going to drag our main camera into the reference of our camera node. Okay, let's save and go test this out. All right, so I can still move, and the character will follow direction. But now if I move my camera to face a different direction and hit W, the character will go in that direction. So wherever I move the camera, the character will go when I hit W to go in that direction. Okay. One other thing I do need to make an adjustment to, if I look down, you can see the character is floating off the ground, and that's because of that initial Y translate position of my character controller. So let's go correct that. Let's go to the character, third-person character, and it's this center Y. So let's just increase that more, 0.05. And let's go back and play. There you go. So it still pops it up. Whenever I hit WSD is when it kind of moves it up vertically. So I'm just going to go back and keep making that adjustment there. Let's do 0.6. And let's see what that looks like there. Until it doesn't actually pop it up in the air. So a little bit more than that. We still need it. So let's try 0.8. And I'm just testing again. There you go. So now it's not moving above the ground. It'll work properly there. Okay, so there's an issue there. We don't have gravity associated with this. So we can correct gravity because right now when we go up a ramp and it doesn't fall down. We also don't have a jump ability with this as well. Alright, so I think that'll wrap up this video. The next video we'll come back and we will add gravity and the ability to jump. So this video discussed how to create third-person character movement that follows the camera with WASD and changes the character angle according to which action I press there.